Hello, everybody. Almost didn't stream tonight. I was helping my daughter with some Python code, but I figured I would. I'm a little tired, but I figured I would come in and do a little what they call vibe coding. Um, I do really need to figure out um what's going on with my code because there's obviously a problem with the Webpart store. So what's happening is no throttling. What's happening is the data is rendering the same for both sides of the page. And I think I know the reason. I think we discussed it a little bit yesterday. The reason being is if I inspect this and I go to components, I can click on this part or on this part. So if I go here and I add general, and then I go here and I add development, you can see that it's doing the same thing for both. Excuse me. Yeah, so it's doing the same thing for both. You can clearly tell when I put them side by side. If I remove general from here, it removes it from there, which obviously is an issue with the Webpart store. And so since it's just a vibe code thing that I'm doing today, let's see, fix looking issue with a view. So those were fixed, but now we need to fix an issue with the Webpart store. So the Webpart store is basically where we define all of our global state. So we have in our application, in this application that I'm building, we have layers. We have the layer of SharePoint, which is this piece right here. Move this over. So we have SharePoint, and then we have the API, and then we have our data layer, which the data layer contains two types of data. It contains, well, really three types of data. You have your SWR hash data, which is the data that's coming from the server. Then you have your Webpart store, which is your global local data. Think of it like this. When you go to the grocery store, you're gonna go buy food, and the food is on the shelves in the aisle. That is your server, where the shelves are. The grocery store is a server. When you walk into the grocery store, you get a grocery cart. And the grocery cart is, think of it as a variable. It's where you put stuff in that you get in the grocery stores. You're putting it into the grocery cart. Okay. So the data has to live somewhere in anything that you build. So in this application we're building, the grocery store is SharePoint. The variables are the grocery cart where you're putting the information in. Now the variables is where I'm getting at with regards to data, right? So the data, you have the SWR cache. That is the data that we just retrieved from the server, from SharePoint. That's why we have this data layer separated into different pieces. The API is the interface between you and the data. Like what you write to be able to get the information from the server is considered the API. Think of that as that when you're ringing out your groceries, that beep 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 when you're paying for the groceries. Think of the API as that scenario that allows you to beep on something and know the cost of it, right? The data itself, would be the price. But then the data has to live somewhere. So when you beep that grocery item, the data comes from wherever they have all of the listings and the prices for all the products, right? And then it's stored on your register. That is what the SWR means. Now, the local state is things like at the register, you're locally at the register. The local state is like, okay, is a conveyor belt on, right? Is a register on. Those are all local states. And then finally, the UI is what the user interface is, what the user sees. The problem that I'm having in the application is that we're using a Webpart store that's called that is basically the Webpart store is using Zustand. Because Zustand is a global state, it's interfering. So here to AI, we're gonna have please review the Webpart store.ts. It is used globally for the Webpart. The issue I am encountering is the Webpart store is not individually deployed at the Webpart level. What I mean to say is that the changes to store in Webpart left column, if I have another Webpart on the second column, it is changing the stand state on both. I think this may be as a result of it using the stand as a global state. Please view current usage. After we will plan use either local state with prop drilling, or perhaps use React comes with a way that you can store data globally as well, and that is called React let me see, globals, called a reducer. I believe it's called a reducer. And you can use context API, perhaps use context or a user. And right now we're in plan mode. So yeah, so we're gonna look to completely redesign the state management for the application. So that's the plan. So React user versus so complex local component state, while Zustand is a third-party library, is simple, lightweight, fast global state management. Okay, so let's go. Designed for global application state access via hooks without needing the context provider wrap at the root. Typically used for local component state, but can be shared globally with React's context API, which is what I was mentioning. Prior to planning actions, a reducer. Use reducer when you manage complex state logic within a single component or a small contained part of your application. Use this time when you need it. Some lightweight, fast solution for sharing global state across various non-connected components. So, I guess the biggest what I find interesting is that I think by use reducer is going to be better for my solution is because this is handled by local state. You notice that when I switch to these are handled all by local state, and it's not changing my navigation on this side. So as long as I make my web part have a state that's localized, and I think reducer would handle that fine. Also, for some context, when I move from step to step on the web part, it does not change on the secondary web part on the page, which is a clear indication that local state using use state from React are not causing issues across multiple web parts, but it is clear issue is with the stack. Yes, you can run. So anyway, yeah, so clearly we have an issue where, and I'm probably gonna have to go back and change some things that I've said on my channel, because I have personally recommended the usage of Zestan, but then again I had never tried to put two web parts side by side, or using the same tool chain, which in our case Zestan happens to be one of the tool chain tools that we're using. So you basically need to figure out a way to handle the state differently in the application. And because the majority of when I think about the architecture of my application, the biggest thing that worries me is the architecture side, but the architecture side was done very well. What we need to do is just fix the state management of the application, and that is something I think I can trust AI to do. But even that as it may be, you notice that I checked in my code when I started this session. In the event that I don't agree with the way it's doing things, I can either undo it or I can continue to prompt it until it does the things the way I want. And what I want it to do is I want it to change the way it handles the state management at a global level. So right now I'm having it do some research, basically reading everywhere that the global web part store is being used, and seeing if we can leverage use reducer with context to localize our state individually by web part, and then we won't have the conflicts where you update one thing and it messes up another thing. So we'll see what it does. Right now it's gonna go through reading everything. Let me create an initial plan document that will ask some clarifying questions before designing the solution. Okay, so local stage with prop drilling. So you mentioned 3 potential approaches: local state, prop drilling, React context API. Technically, is the same thing with reducer. Or currently manages 7 state properties, 12 plus action methods, instant identification. Each Webpart instance needs a unique identifier to isolate the state. I can see the Webpart receives props from. Should I create a unique ID in the Webpart class like this context, this ID if available, or create one? Pass it down to the React components as a prop. If there's a specific SharePoint framework property you prefer, uses an instance identifier. So is it basically making the suggestion that we can use an identifier? I guess I could see that. Technically, you could make. No, that wouldn't work. Because what I was thinking initially is you could do Zustand, and you can say in the Zustand store identifier A and identifier B. Problem is that when you set that, depending on which one goes first, it's gonna override, because when I set this to A and then I go with this one set to B, it changes that one to B. Likewise, if I switch this one to A, it switches that one to A. So it doesn't appear to be any difference there. When switching away from, do you want to remove this and completely from the project? Keep the same store API. Restructure the state management approach entirely. The save configuration of SharePoint property pane the configuration state in prop. Should the new implementation still work with the existing configurations, or should this break? Is a breaking change acceptable? Please tell me my purposes are not designed out. Aside from doing a lot of prop drilling, and using context user, what other recommendation you have? I don't think wait, it's saying that I don't think the Webpart instance identifier would be beneficial. How, I mean, I'm trying to think of how it could be beneficial. If we set up an identifier, like say we regenerated a random GUID every time that we add one, how does that help us? Like, how does that change anything? Because the reality is, even if I have a GUID on one of them and a GUID on the other one, even though they're different, I just don't see. I don't think the Webpart identifier would be beneficial, given the constraint that it will always run the action or make a prop change to both stores as if it was one. For example, if I add topic 1 on the left side, I see it also change on the right side. So if you are implying that I can have an identifier for Webpart, have it linked to the store, that is not possible, because depending on the race condition of each Webpart loading, the identifier override would occur. So if I have the Webpart on the left with ID 123 and the one on the right ID 456, the moment I change one, say to 1 to 3, both now have the ID of 1 to 3. And if on the second one I put ID 456, the original one I set to 1 to 3 will now be a 6, unless you had something else in mind. Yeah, so we will see what happens. The only reason I think having a wrapper with a context provider would work is because it's literally wrapping that one web part. Because it has the wrapper, it's technically part of that document object model. But yeah. Let's do, while we wait. Okay. While we wait. I was helping my daughter with Python. I'm really starting to like Python, and I really like that she's starting to like it. I'm really considering potentially working on that with her. If she's interested in learning more, I could potentially learn some of that with her. Why? It looks like I'm dropping frames. I think. Hopefully not. On. I have too many things open, maybe. This. That. I hate it when I set things to a certain setup and then it does different. Let me change it real. think there's an issue with my internet. Well, now it's saying I'm doing good on my frame rate thing. I don't understand. Check my. While I do that, hopefully you can see my. And it's just crapping out. And my internet's messing up. I'm gonna have to stop. I'm gonna have to stop and restart it. Restart my internet, I think.